Okay, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to our latest market briefing hosted with the MGAA with We Are Guernsey. Our topic today is exploring the option of operating an MGA from Guernsey, and our presenters are Dominic, Wheatley, Richard C and Joe Stoddart. We may have someone log in. So please can I start with Dominic?
Thank you, Ben. And thank you very much to Peter and the MGA Association generally for inviting us along today. Thank you all for coming. Anyway, my name is Dominic Wheatley. I'm the Chief Executive of Guernsey Finance, which means I am paid to make Guernsey sound as appealing as possible. So I've declared that interest. Before this job, I worked in insurance for a quarter of a century, first of all in the London market as an underwriter, aviation reinsurance, excess of loss, and also space satellite risks. And then I moved to Guernsey as an underwriter as part of the upscaling of the captive industry in Guernsey in 1995. So this is a little bit for me of a return to yeah, we've got it. We've got it. So that's me. We've already talked about me. As Ben mentioned, we've got three of us presenting today, so I'll talk a little bit about an overview of that, a bit about Guernsey as a financial centre, a little bit about the island as a business centre. Richard is going to talk much more specifically about Guernsey as an MGA centre. He has a good deal of experience with this group, Avantis group, of working with MGAs. There are other people in amongst you who have similar experience, so there are a few people around who can answer any questions that come up on that. And then Jo, who is the Director of Locate Guernsey, which is my sister agency, and her job is to promote Guernsey as a place to live and to cover off the lifestyle aspects of setting up a business in Guernsey. So we'll start with an overview of Guernsey. I'm going to talk about three elements. I could talk about lots of other things, but I think these are probably the three most valid and important ones for the purposes of this audience. First of all, the ease of business in Guernsey. Secondly, the work-life balance. And then thirdly, the stability and the tax regime. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of those. If I start then with the ease of business, Guernsey is in a sense a microcosm of London, in the sense that we are a hub of the different niche industries that we service. So we're not like London in the sense of breadth of finance services that we offer, but each of the services that we offer, we have a full service offering and a great deal of expertise in those niche areas. And some of those areas are very niche, so we work in, for instance, in insurance-linked securities. There are probably only a couple hundred people in the world working in insurance-linked securities. So you don't have to have that many people to be a real centre of excellence in that sort of niche area. And so we are small and we are easily navigated. And the first thing about doing business in Guernsey is much like within, say, 400 metres of where I stand, you could probably find absolutely everything you need to run an insurance company in London. You could say the same thing standing in the middle of St Peter Port within a couple of hundred metres of where you stand. If you pick the right spot, you can find absolutely everything you need in terms of services and support to form an MGA in Guernsey. And what's more, it's a much smaller place than this, so you can find them a lot more easily. There are about a dozen licensed insurance managers in Guernsey, so it doesn't take you long to actually speak to all of them. Then you can pick one that's right for you. And that applies equally in terms of service providers like lawyers. I think there are probably about 10 or 11 lawyers with real insurance capabilities in Guernsey. Again, it's not that difficult to go and see all of them, and it's not that difficult to get advice on which the best are. Also, in terms of simplicity and ease of access, our insurance law and regulation is about as simple as you can find. It was originally put together in 1987, and when I joined the industry in 1995, I actually read the law. I don't know how many people who work in insurance in in the UK would say that they've read all the law that applies to UK insurance. I suspect not many, or maybe none. But our law is still readable and the regulation is still readable. It is actually viable for a person to read the entire lot without actually killing themselves in the process. We also have a lot of ancillary things, and key amongst those from the point of view of this, which is basically talking about insurance entrepreneurs, is the availability of venture capital. We have a lively venture capital community in Guernsey. It is, again, very easy to access. I can tell you a couple of places where they get together to have breakfast, and anyone can go along, talk to them about their business, and possibly walk away from that breakfast with some startup funding or some secondary funding. It genuinely is that easy, and they are that approachable, and they're very keen to work with startup businesses. In terms of work-life balance, I'll leave Jo because I'm not trying to steal her thunder, but just to say that it genuinely is possible to leave the office at 4 o'clock and be on the beach with your family at 4:15, or possibly on the first tee if you prefer, or maybe in a cafe with your mates. We get pretty fed up, frankly, if there's a bit of traffic around and it takes us more than 15 minutes to commute into work. And a lot of us, I have a walk of about 20 minutes to work, which is really quite nice. And at the same time, I live in a market town. So I don't have to live in amongst this stuff. And in London, which is a very sort of, I've lived in London, and it's a very anonymous and anonymizing place to live. You're in the middle of a proper community, and you have all of the lifestyle benefits of that. And you're able to work in a proper international business environment. So Jo will talk to that a bit more. Tax and stability. We have, Jo will talk about personal taxation, but business tax is in Guernsey on international business is 10% on some businesses and 0 on others. So it is a low tax environment. That's not a matter of tax competition. That's simply because Guernsey is a low tax jurisdiction and a low tax community. Our state of Guernsey has imposed upon itself the discipline of raising only a max of 27% of GDP in taxation. They choose to do that mainly through income tax, property taxes, and a little bit of selective corporation tax. But generally speaking, we don't tax capital, we don't have death duties or inheritance tax, and we don't tax expenditure. We don't have VAT or sales taxes. So it is a low tax jurisdiction. We also have a stability of a 1,000-year constitution and a 1,000-year relationship with the UK, which is actually with really as Queen of England, interestingly, rather than Queen of the UK, but nevertheless it is with the Queen, not Parliament, which means that we have control of our own environment, we set our own laws, business laws and otherwise, and we have the ability to therefore develop our own environment, and that's particularly important around financial services. When you're doing niche business, what you want to do is design a regulatory environment that is specifically appropriate to that niche, and that's very much what we do. Alongside that, though, we do have a very strong commitment to our reputation, both as an island and community and as a business centre. And that's reflected in our commitment to international standards of business conduct and also being a good global citizen in terms of the way that we conduct ourselves and conduct business. So we have a very strong commitment to international standards of regulation. Our regulation is not European, but it is in line with the IMIS core standards. Our anti-money laundering is also in line, in fact, has been signed off by the money valves, the EU's inspectors, as being the best that they've inspected, and actually probably the best in the world. And our tax regime was signed off by the EU as being compliant with their standards of non-harmful tax practice in March last year. Without doubt, we are reputationally and in terms of our capabilities, the strongest offshore insurance centre in the world. and I challenge anyone to question that on objective grounds. So why are we here talking to you today? Well, to some extent, I've given you some of what we want to talk about, but basically we've observed a lot of growth and activity in the GCA space in the UK, and the reasons for that are quite apparent in terms of what's going on in the broader insurance industry, with insurance companies looking to diversify risk but not looking to take on extensive cost bases and add to their ongoing cost base. So it's quite a straightforward for them to look for other people who can deploy capital on their behalf without the necessity of them building additional corporate infrastructure. We've also seen MGAs emerging in Guernsey, and we have a number of them already there without having actually sought that. They've just come along and decided that they like what they see. Not in addition to that, of course, Peter and David Coop, who's not here today, but I'm sure would have liked to have been over to Guernsey, have talked to us, and have told us that they believe that Guernsey is potentially a very, very good location for MGAs and MGA startups. So all of that makes us believe that there are people for whom Guernsey would be a very good location to set up and run their MGA business. I mentioned about our specialism, insurance specialism, and our global standards. So we've got everything to the standard that you would expect. Our substance and expertise, and our leading position as a centre for offshore insurance and a nascent MGA centre. Our entire insurance industry historically is based on our ability to conduct international insurance from Guernsey. And that's the expertise that we offer, is to actually help you deliver your product into markets around the world. So a bit of history. Our insurance industry goes technically back to 1922, when there was a captive formed. I can't remember the name of it, probably ought to know that. It doesn't exist anymore, needless to say, but that more recently in the 70s and 80s there was a significant growth in the interest in captives, and over that period Guernsey emerged as a key centre. We're now very, very comfortably the #1 captive centre for international captives in Europe, and actually if you ignore very substantial US domestic captives, then we're the biggest captive centre in the world. We also have a lot of specialised underwriters. So we used to have a big aviation insurance company based in Guernsey called Polygon, which I worked for in London for a while. But we also have had a number of other general aviation underwriters. We've got a fine arts underwriting team in London, and we are a major centre, in fact the major centre for kidnap and ransom insurance, the largest in the world. So we have quite a lot of specialised underwriting operations. I mentioned that we're a nascent MGA centre, so we have a number of those already. And of course, captives, mutuals and insurance management services. The captives came out of corporate, but the mutuals came out of things like the Medical Defence Union, which actually will provide you with cover in the event that you want to sue your surgeon. It seems to be an ever-growing thing. I think there's a recent headline about the NHS's growing cost of medical malpractice suit. And then, of course, the support services, which have really developed alongside the industry with the expertise in law, accountant, actuaries. Uninteresting fact of the day, Guernsey has the highest incidence per capita of actuaries of any community in the world. Makes it a very good insurance engine, but not necessarily the best party. Regulation, I mentioned about the ease of reading it, but one of the other things is that a regulator is as I mentioned earlier, of global standards, not Solvency II, but the same. It's risk-based, so effectively, because we have only about fewer than 1,000 insurance entities, it is possible for them to basically look at each of those entities and apply a principle-based approach to agree. There are, of course, some prescriptive rules that have to be met in terms of minimum capital and so on, but generally speaking, the regulator is extremely flexible and approachable. And they're very open also to innovation. They will they look, for instance, we have the world's first blockchain-based ILS structure, which did need the regulator to look quite carefully at how they would regulate and effectively and had to redevise some of their processes. And then, of course, the ease and speed. Typically, I would say to get an insurance company up and running in Guernsey from a regulatory standpoint would be a process of 5-6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks if there were a couple of questions that came up, as opposed to the sort of 6-month minimum that you get with the DRA. So very easy, and then once you've got the agreement, you can trade without any problems. They'll issue the license straight away. So nice, approachable, easy regulator. If you rang me on a Monday, I could get you a meeting with the regulator on a Wednesday without any problem at all. And if it was really urgent, I could possibly get you a meeting with the regulator on the same day. Again, not something you'll find on short there. International business environment. So we have got quite a range of international connectivity. We've got very good relations with a number of regulators around the world, including a lot of MOUs. Our regulators have been very handy at talking to regulators even in places like China and Hong Kong and so on. We have an excellent relationship with the EU. We've never been in the EU, as say Brexit doesn't directly affect us, although of course indirectly it will of course affect us. But what it does mean is that because the UK is coming out of the EU, it does enable us to redevelop our relationship with the UK and look to get better market access into UK markets, and that I would think will enable us to write directly into the UK in due course. And then I guess the other thing to mention is that there is currently an ongoing exercise looking at our relationship with the NAIC with a view to getting better relationship with America and being able to access the American markets for reinsurance as an admitted reinsurer. So all of that is very positive, and in fact, if you look at most of the countries around the world that most people would be looking to underwrite in, we will be underwriting there in pretty much every continent bar the Antarctic. I don't think there's anyone writing risks in the Antarctic, but there are certain people writing risks in North and South America, down in the South Pacific, around Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, and throughout Europe and even into Central and Eastern Europe. So there are I doubt there are many of the 197, I think it is, UN member countries that we don't underwrite into. The only one I can think of hand would be North Korea. I suspect we don't have any North Korea business, but I'm only guessing. And so, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to hand down to Richard, who's going to talk a bit more specifically about MGA and the detail of MGAs in Guernsey. Is that one? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dominic. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Guernsey MGA experience. Talk a little bit about. So I'm Richard T. Ashton, the CEO of Avantis Group. In terms of my own experience, I joined an insurance group in Guernsey in 1990. Dominic's already mentioned. So I've been involved in managing third-party underwriting companies, captive insurance companies, underwriting agencies, underwriting for Lloyd's syndicates, UK and international companies, so a broad range of those. Avantis is an owner, it's headquartered in Guernsey, but it's an owner of both Guernsey and UK MGA businesses. and insurance intermediaries. So I do have experience of MGAs in both jurisdictions, and maybe compare and contrast as we go on. If anybody has any questions, please do feel free to buzz in when you want to see a particular topic that's of interest to yourself. So why Guernsey? A great place to live and do business. Dominic and Joe will really talk about that. Obviously, I went there 30 years ago, and I never left. So I must. It does have a broad regulatory framework, as Dominic touched on. So that will embrace MGA businesses as a form of insurance manager. So we have intermediary laws, obviously third-party insurers, captive insurers, ILS structures, as Dominic mentioned, and also have insurance and reinsurance, which may not be relevant to an MGA structure. The concept of the Guernsey Insurance Manager is really about the people within the manager, and the manager then manages a number of insurance companies, typically captive insurance companies. But that's the way the structure was originally set up. It doesn't in any way prevent the insurance company having its own staff. For instance, all the variations in between are possible. An MGA in Guernsey could be writing for a Guernsey insurer, but obviously a Guernsey insurer would be challenged potentially where it might underwrite, but it can also underwrite for non-resident insurers. That would be EU insurers, obviously UK, Lloyd's, etc. Can operate in Guernsey. There is an excellent financial services infrastructure, as Dominic touched on, and obviously the insurance world benefits from that as well. And of course, very good connections to London, so that we can come and talk to you like we have today. So how does it work? How do you set business? So typically, business will be introduced to an MGA in Guernsey by a broker who will be authorised to intermediate compliance application. If it's a commercial client, then that commercial client could deal direct, and in a way you might be then thinking about captive insurance, but it could be third party as well. Or you could be dealing via a non-admitted broker. You could possibly have even a broker in Guernsey dealing partner. Obviously that wouldn't work for smaller businesses. The insurer you're underwriting for could be either admitted or non-admitted, domicile. Clearly, operation like Lloyd's has very strict rules nowadays about how it deals with business which is coming from those jurisdictions. Guernsey, on the other hand, is basically a non-admitted jurisdiction to be like. So fundamentally, you can get the business to Guernsey. Sorry, I moved on to slides. I might regret pressing that button. Okay. Yeah. Obviously, if you're underwriting business where it's perhaps mass market business, things like TCF, treating customers fairly, that burden doesn't go away, but clearly it will fall upon the broker in the jurisdiction that the business is coming from. So typically that could be UK business. And that broker has to address the challenge that he may be placing business with a Guernsey insurance company, which may be unrated, non-admitted in the jurisdiction, which can have an impact on client access to things like ombudsman, financial services compensation scheme, etc. Although Guernsey does have an ombudsman and the compensation scheme, albeit different to that in the UK. Quite often I get asked whether people who sell insurers. Some insurance companies are really, to me, aimed at commercial clients. There are clearly unique risks in understanding how a sell company is structured, what access to capital there is, etc. So the Commission would not view that as a vehicle that would insure mass market risks. So I would say they're only really available to commercial clients. But the broker, again, you can be dealing directly with the commercial client. Sorry. So they're aimed at commercial business. With a cell, you've got, not just with a cell, with insurance companies you do have options, but typically with a cell you may well be looking at a very particular stream of business. If that business is collateralised, ILS type structures, or potentially 100% reinsured, then you can look at structures which don't then require solvency. So I'm not really here anyway to talk about insurers, but that may have an impact on what MGA may well do. Cells could possibly be used to access a non-admitted capacity provider, in that you could have that as a 100% reinsurer of your cell, for instance. And then the cell will be underwritten for the Guernsey insurance manager. As I mentioned before, if you are using a cell, then you need proper disclosure to the client of what the cell involves and whether that is appropriate. Do I need insurance manager status? So in Guernsey, as I mentioned, we have this concept of insurance manager, really originally set up managing multiple insurance companies in terms of captives. But effectively, it's a part of the intermediary legislation which covers insurance brokers and insurance managers, and the MGA business is effectively being treated as a subset of an insurance manager. We don't have an equivalent of authorised representative status as there is under the FCA, which obviously used a lot of MGA structures, but you could operate as a trading style, perhaps, of an insurance manager. There are also examples of people working in Guernsey but actually working for a UK MGA and actually observing the authorisations that MGA has got. So there are other variations as well. So what is the infrastructure like? We've touched on already. The offshore plant centre has very good infrastructure, legal, accounting, etc. Dominic also mentioned there are many insurance managers in the island. Those can be subsidiaries of the larger brokers, or they can be independently owned operations, not aligned with any of the brokers, and many of them here represented, only represented here today, and obviously if you're interested, I'm sure you'll be engaging with them. You could set up an MGA and you could set it up as a managed manager. So you don't have to have dedicated staff. One of the insurance managers in Guernsey will provide the necessary accounting, underwriting, technical processing, brokers ledger, all of those services on a needs basis. So, what are the advantages of Guernsey? Touch on again, of course, great place to live. Easy access to the city, and clearly if you're in the insurance world, you will be wanting at some stage to come to London or whatever part of your business. The business in Guernsey wouldn't be liable for VAT on the services consumed in Guernsey. That's something to bear in mind, things like legal services, adjusting, perhaps some system services, but obviously it has to be on services actually consumed in Guernsey. There is, as Dominic also said, there's a very active insurance centre. There's experienced staff, very much geared around working for third-party businesses. So, in summary, I would say Guernsey is a very good option to consider for setting up an MGA business. A particularly good option if you yourself want to perhaps have a change of lifestyle, and then look at perhaps how you might employ your skills in Guernsey via an MGA structure, or to an extent some of the structures that may be available to you. That's my piece. I'll hand over to Jack.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jo Stoddart, and I'm the director of Locate Guernsey. I'm also Kate Guernsey as a broker, but I really do believe it very passionately. Locate Guernsey is an agency which is charged with enticing high net worths and businesses to the island. And it's lovely actually that in the audience is the first director of Locate Guernsey, Richard, it's great to have him here. And we not only promote the island, but we also assist businesses and individuals who are coming in and help them with any administrative processes and generally support them right the way through. We want them to know that Guernsey is interested in them, that Guernsey cares, and that we want to make it work for them. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about the benefits and convenience and the ease of living and working in Guernsey, and how as an MGA, as Dominic and Richard have said, you can establish yourself quite easily. So I'm going to start with a short video just to set the scene. So obviously when you talk about Guernsey, tax is obviously a subject which often springs to mind, and Dom's already touched on it. We have obviously, as he said, a flat rate of income tax of 20%. There are caps available. No inheritance tax, no capital gains tax, no VAT, no goods and sales tax, no wealth or estate taxes. There's also no council tax. We have a similar tax, parish rates, but that's actually less per annum than it was for a month of my council tax when I was living in the UK. So that gives you an idea of what it's like. Company standard rate of tax obviously is 0%. But although tax might be the initial reason that people look at Guernsey, for the majority of them, actually they choose Guernsey for other reasons. As we've all mentioned, we are well connected. We do have our own airline, which is essentially to protect our London links. Now, those in the audience who live in Guernsey or go frequently would know that we do have the odd problem with fog, but as a general rule, Aureli is our local airline, and they're very good at trying to get you home. I can vouch for that from my experiences last week, but anyway, we won't say too much about that, but essentially they guarantee 5 or 6 rotations to Gatwick every day, and along with other airlines, we fly to Manchester, to Bristol, to Southampton, to East Midlands, and all these places dotted on the map. For the last 18 months, we've actually had an open skies policy, and in the first 8 months, we actually had 8 new routes, so it's actually very encouraging. And there are discussions at the moment about routes into France. We do have seasonal routes to Grenoble for those who like to go skiing, but they're looking at more routes for France in due course. It's only 35 or 40 minutes flying time to London. You can be in central London or Manchester or Southampton in time for an early morning meeting. I was at the IOD in Pall Mall at 9:15 this morning, which I thought wasn't bad going, especially given that there was a 40-minute delay on the Gatwick Express. So we've got a ferry service to Jersey and to the UK and to France, and there are quite a few companies that offer private plane charter as well. But we're not just physically convenient, but we're convenient in other ways too, because we're obviously the same time zone as the UK, we're English speaking, we have a British education system. As Dominic mentioned, we have easy access to the regulator, to government officials, to senior civil servants, and to the decision makers. As Richard and Dom both said, you can get an appointment with the regulator very quickly. We can also get you in front of the government minister or somebody who is a decision maker in the process quite quickly if that's necessary. We're very politically and economically stable, and we have a very pro-business government. They recognise the importance for new and diverse businesses, and they really want to get that message across that Guernsey is open for business. In terms of the quality of life, I can certainly vouch for the fact that I found huge improvement when I moved to Guernsey. I'm from the UK originally. I spent 17 years living and working in Paris, 20 months in London, and then we moved to the Channel Islands 18 years ago, spent the first 4 years in Jersey and been in Guernsey ever since. And I have to say, when we moved, particularly to Guernsey, actually, I felt as though I got my life and my husband back, because we were no longer dealing with the commute, and my husband would put my daughter to bed on a Sunday evening and wouldn't see her awake again until Saturday morning. And actually it's just so fantastic, and I can really vouch for so many people really appreciate that, and it's something that I can certainly say that I benefited from. The island's incredibly safe, it's very secure, it's very stable, and that's just really lovely. And I think increasingly these days people want to see their children grow up and enjoy more leisure time. They want to have a successful career and a strong business, but they want to have that balance, and I personally have experienced that balance really is quite possible in Guernsey. And we also have a great education system, so it's a brilliant place for families. Now, obviously, we think that Guernsey is great today, but the ambition for the island as a whole is that it will be even better tomorrow. So we have the Future Guernsey Plan, and this is centred on a 20-year vision for Guernsey, that we will be amongst the happiest and healthiest places to live in the world, where everyone has equal opportunity to achieve their potential. We'll be a safe and inclusive community which nurtures its unique heritage and environment and is underpinned by a diverse and successful economy. And we actually have specific policy priorities which have been agreed by our government, and they're regularly monitored and updated if necessary. But to track a performance against this goal, we use the Regional Wellbeing Index, which is developed by the OECD. And that looks at the economic well-being of a country, but also at the experiences and the living conditions of its population. Now, the latest figures for Guernsey were published at the end of 2019, and I just showed you one of the sets of figures. This shows how high Guernsey is on the comparison of household incomes for OECD member countries. Our GDP per capita has grown consistently in real terms between 2015 and 2018, continuing an upward trend over the long-term history. But in terms of experience, in terms of how people feel, the living conditions in Guernsey really are superb. We have fresh, clean air, lots of opportunities to walk on beautiful, clean beaches, but that's actually all really good for mental health and well-being. Interestingly, we had some Chinese families that moved, thanks to Guernsey Finance, a couple of years ago from Shanghai, and I spoke to both of them and asked them how they were finding things and what it was like, and they both independently commented that actually it was the fresh air that they really found helped them tremendously, and they found a great difference and improvement in the mental health and well-being of their children, because they also found that the school system was very agreeable. They had time and opportunity to play and to be children, and actually for them that was something that was incredibly important. If you ask anyone in Guernsey, they'll all tell you that actually Guernsey might have its faults, but it's an absolutely fantastic place to bring up children. And obviously, with the lack of commute, it means that we have more time for leisure pursuits. So there's lots of opportunity for outdoor things and enjoying the natural environment. My colleague was telling me the other day that his wife is a lawyer, and she walks along to the outdoor bathing pools 2 or 3 times a week and swims in the outdoor bathing pools in the sea water, which I just thought absolutely amazing. But can you imagine living in London and having the opportunity to go do something like that? I think it's brilliant. There's also plenty of opportunities for team and individual sports. You can see in the middle Heather Watson. She's actually a local Guernsey girl. Matt Letitia, local boy. Maya Letitia is no relation to Matt, but she's a young girl who's just signed a contract for one of the British female clubs. So there's lots of opportunity to do things outside of work, to enjoy life, to pursue the hobbies and the interests that you have. Also, we're a tourist destination, so there's lots going on, particularly in the summer season. But I have to say that is Rocaine Beach at the Regatta, and that's probably the most crowded you will ever see a beach in Guernsey. It doesn't usually get that busy. We have an annual literary festival where we have various different authors who come to the island. We have walking festivals, floral festivals, heritage festivals, you name it, we do it. We also have what we call Seafront Sundays several times in the summer, and the main road along the front of the harbour is actually closed. The restaurants still out, set out tables and chairs, there are craft stalls. It's just generally a sort of a nice thing to do, and it's obviously we have a lot of cruise ships that come into Guernsey as well, so it provides extra things for the tourists to have a look at. We have our own hospital. We have very good healthcare in Guernsey. You can generally see a GP on the same day. I remember when we were living in London, having to take half a day off or a day off if you wanted to actually go and see your GP. If you sent one, you would have had to have waited 10 days or so to a cottage appointment. We don't have the NHS, and so we do actually all pay what we call social security contributions, which go towards the cost of healthcare. And you do have to pay a small amount for a GP's visit. But if your GP then refers you to hospital for secondary care, then that is all covered under the health benefit system. So houses in Guernsey, lots of different styles, lots of different things to choose from, whether you want a mansion, or can afford a mansion, whether you want a little cottage, whether you want a terraced house, whether you want an apartment. There are all sorts of different things. And actually our housing system works on a two-tier system. We have what we call the open market, and a certain number of properties on the island are designated as being open market properties, which means that anyone with a British or EU passport or who have right of abode in the UK can simply go to Guernsey and live in the open market. They can choose to work if they wish to, not work if they don't want to. They can stay there indefinitely. They can do any type of work or work part-time if they want to, work full-time. It's very open. But obviously there is a slight premium for those kind of properties because you are to a certain extent not just buying the bricks and mortar, but you are buying the right to live on the island. However, the majority of properties are what we call local market, and they are essentially for those who are locally born, but they're also for those who are brought into the island on employment permits. There are three types of employment permit. There's the short-term employment permit, the medium-term, and the long-term. And I would say that the long-term is the holy grail because that gives you the right to live in Guernsey for 8 years, and then once you get beyond 8 years, you gradually become a permanent resident. So that is the thing to aim for, really, and to hope for. And so for MGAs, what we've been looking at is what we call a pathway permit. So for business owners who are looking to set up in Guernsey, we've started issuing these new pathway permits. They're in their infancy, but actually it allows people to come in and live on the local market because that is a bit cheaper. Not normally given to small businesses, but the MGAs are the first exception to those rules, and the policies in place are being developed at the moment because we want to encourage MGAs to come over to the island. A business owner would need to apply to be what we call an approved employer, and they need to show a solid business plan which would enhance Guernsey's economy and show that it would create jobs for local people. So the pathway permit, basically, as I've said, at the outset is the holy grail, but depending on the business plan, you would initially perhaps be given a medium-term employment permit, which could be for 5 years, but it would be understood that the business owner's goal is actually the long-term employment permit. So review dates would be set at either 3 or 5 years, and the business owners will need to reach certain milestones which will have been pre-agreed by the population management team and the business owners in order for them to have confirmation that yes, the business is going the way it should be going, and therefore their medium-term employment permit can be converted into a long-term employment permit. And provided that the milestones have been met, then this won't be a problem. As I say, it's very new, still in its infancy, and actually we have someone recently, I don't think here today, but we have someone recently who was actually given an MGA, who was actually given a long-term employment permit straight off, effectively. He still has milestones. He has to prove that he's done certain things by the end of year 5, but effectively he is en route and he has his long-term employment permit. It would mean that anybody who has a long-term employment permit has to work within that business for 8 years, but at the 8-year point they're considered to be an established resident, and so therefore they're no longer tied to the business. So if they wish to go and set up another business or work for someone else or retire or sell the business, they would still be able to remain in Guernsey. And if they stayed on the island for as long as 14 years, they then become permanent residents and would be able to come and go as they please. It would mean that they would always have the right to come back to Guernsey and live in the local market. They could still, if they had the right passport, come and go and live in the open market, but obviously the local market is more attractive and financially affordable. And obviously Locate Guernsey would be alongside anybody who was wanting to go through that process, applying for a pathway permit. So there might be a certain amount of administration, but you're not on your own, you're there to help and to make it easy for you. If you wanted to then recruit other staff to come and work with you, there's obviously a great pool of people in Guernsey, but we do have high employment rates, so it is sometimes difficult to find people locally, but they are very skilled. I think Guernsey people generally have a reputation for being very adaptable and entrepreneurial, and I think historically they've seized opportunities and been ready to transform themselves, so they're really a skilled and adaptable workforce. But basically an employer who's been through the process to get a long-term employment permit for themselves, they will be deemed to be an approved employer, and therefore they'll be allowed to recruit from off-island for someone who would be doing what we call an in-policy role. There are effectively 24 pages on the internet of in-policy roles describing the type of role and the type of permit that would apply to it. So I've taken two examples here from the insurance sector. A director, senior manager would qualify for a long-term employment permit, and then there's a few explanations about the sort of thing they would be expected to have in order to qualify for that. And the same for a client manager who would qualify for a medium-term employment permit. So generally it's relatively straightforward, and there are options. What we want to say is that it's possible, we want to work with you, we want to make it happen. So I'm just going to finish off by sharing a video with some comments from a recent arrival who is not working in the insurance sector, but he does run his own business. And I think he has some interesting things to say about his experience.
So my name is James Barnfather, and I'm the Managing Director of Guernsey Finance in the UK. We moved to Guernsey very recently, 6 months ago, and met people at the Guernsey team. They introduced us to some of the business world here, which is fantastic. And then they gave us lots of support and made the decision. I think we moved within 8 weeks. There was no one deciding factor moment that said we need to go to Guernsey. There's an amalgamation of things. So both from a business point of view, there's the opportunity to support being an international business. And there's a lot of talent in that, young talent. And we want to try and bring some of this fresh young talent into our business and grow on that. And then secondly, it was the kids' schools. The kids came here, loved it, the lifestyle. You know, we were 15 minutes to the beach. Kids just spent so much time outside. There's also the benefits of living here that everything seems to get done a lot quicker. You put an application into something, and literally the next day you're getting a call. The speed at which things happen and the personal nature of the way things happen has been absolutely fantastic. And that's really important. It has so many benefits, and the benefits you're not always aware of until you get here, start living a life. People are fantastic. It's half an hour back to Gatwick, it's 20 minutes across the centre of Southampton, and the whole island vibe is just such a lovely, lovely place to be. That yeah, come across, do it, and you only do it once.
Nice to see that he's really loved it. But anyway, so thank you very much indeed. Here to available to answer any questions if you wish. I've also got some USB sticks with some documents that you can download and some other videos as well about the island. So thank you.
And does anyone have any questions for the guy? First question, Dominic, on the regulatory framework. Does the island regulatory framework have Solvency II or IID equivalents in the island below that?
No. We've looked at that a couple of times, but we don't have a very mature reinsurance market the way that Bermuda does. And of course, Solvency II really only, in terms of market access, only really affects reinsurance. But at the same time, it has a lot of impact on other elements of insurance where it impacts it without actually providing any benefits. So we've made a conscious decision not to apply for Solvency II equivalents. But as I mentioned, effectively our levels of solvency do apply the same levels as Solvency II. So if you think about that 1 in 200 incident rate that Solvency II implies, then that we have an equivalent level of solvency requirement to that 1 in 200 for retail and well, basically retail insurance business, not for other forms of business necessarily.
Okay, I had a question that was sent in for the event, and that was just whether a managing general agency writing on behalf of a Guernsey insurance company can provide greater legal protection to purchase of insurance than if a person were buying directly from the insurance company. Is that one for you, Dominic, or yourself?
I'll try and map out that scenario a little bit. I mean, the Guernsey has its ombudsman scheme and it has its sort of investor protection scheme. I think you would probably not expect them to be as good as sort of generous perhaps as a UK scheme. I think possibly the premise of an MGA, and I wasn't quite sure whether I was premised to be in the UK or not, but so I think you'd have to be sort of careful there. I mean, you'd be talking about a Guernsey, if you're talking about a Guernsey insurance entity with a Guernsey MGA, you wouldn't have the same levels of protection. As I've mentioned before, if you have an insurance broker in the UK who's then making that decision whether to deal with the business, they've got to rationalise that for their TCF purposes. That doesn't mean that they can't rationalise it, it doesn't mean they'd have to think about that and demonstrate that they thought about it.
Okay, thank you. Well, can everyone just show the count of 3 presenters a quick round of applause, please?